Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us. I do want to just mention very quickly, this is being recorded, so we will be able to share this after the session for anyone who may be interested in sharing. So my name is Courtney McGeechee. I'm the director of the Ocean Vision's UN Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Climate Solutions and Innovations. Pretty sure I have the longest title in the room, but thank you all for joining us. We're really excited about this panel. So Ocean Visions, in collaboration with the Georgia Aquarium and Georgia Institute of Technology, we've been working on contributing to the UN Ocean Decade to promote and advance transformative ocean solutions to address the ocean climate crisis and facilitate sustainable development through innovation, testing, and collaboration. Today, we're going to hear from a few of our partner decade programs, and we're going to start with brief remarks from the Decade Coordinating Unit, but before I do that, I will briefly let you know who's on our panel, and then we will have 5-minute introductions from each, followed by quick moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Okay, so joining us today, we have Stephen Bograd from NOAA in the SmartNet program. We have Donna Hazard representing Sea Ahead and 1,000 Ocean Startups. We have Neil Davies representing the Blue Climate Initiative, as well as a member of the GEO Steering Committee. And then, last but not least, we have Alex Godoy Faundes representing the GEO's Patagonia Hub.
Dear colleagues and friends, it's such a pleasure to be here today. Obviously, I wish I could be there with you in person, but not possible, so happy to be able to make these recorded remarks as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Alison Clausen. I'm a program specialist at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and I'm the Deputy Coordinator of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and thrilled to be able to represent the Ocean Decade team here during this session. So I wanted to give you a quick update and some perspectives of what's been happening in the decade and how we see the decade moving forward over the next year or so, and particularly the importance of the Ocean Climate Nexus and the role of the Decade Collaborative Centres, including the one that is so generously hosted by Ocean Visions. The decade's now entering its third year of implementation, which is quite hard to believe, but there we are. The first year focused very strongly on visibility, on engagement, on making sure that stakeholders were really part of the decade, enthused and motivated. I think we achieved that mission. We've got an enormous and very vibrant community that is working with us on many fronts in the decade. In 2022, we then started focusing more on the infrastructure, on the processes, on the mechanics of the decade. And this is where we saw our first decade collaborative centres really starting to emerge, including the Ocean Vision's Ocean Decade Collaborative Centre for Ocean Climate Solutions, which you're talking about today, as well as other decade collaborative centres, which are starting to form part of a very important network. In 2023 now, we're really starting to shift again our focus to focus on the scientific impact of the decade. And that means really working with our decade actions to support them to be able to undertake the science, to generate the knowledge, and very importantly, use that knowledge for solutions. And of course, that's where structures such as the DCC are going to be such vital partners for the decade to achieve its mission of really having that focus on transformative and solutions-oriented science. And all of this is very important because, of course, 2024 and 2025 are again going to be huge years in terms of the global ocean and climate agendas. 2024 in April 2024 in Barcelona. We will be holding the second International Ocean Decade Conference, which we hope will see many of you at, where we'll be stock taking, celebrating achievements, but also setting a collective vision for the way forward for the decade around the Ocean Decade challenges. And this will include, of course, a focus on challenge number 5 related to the Ocean Climate Nexus and looking at our shared priorities for the Ocean Climate Nexus in the framework of the decade moving forward. 2025 will then, of course, see the next UN Ocean Conference, where the Ocean Climate Nexus will be undoubtedly one of the major themes that will be addressed. The decade is growing very, very strongly, as I alluded to. We now have 47 global programs. We have over 250 projects, and this growth is continuing unabated. So the role of the Decade Collaborative Centres, including that run by Ocean Visions, is also growing in line with the growth of the Decade ecosystem. These collaborative centres are so important to be the connection between what is still a relatively small Decade coordination unit at the global level and that emerging network of partners. And the Decade Collaborative Centre for Ocean Climate Solutions is really quite unique because it does have such a cross-cutting role and is really able to help us in that other aim of the decade, which is to break down silos and ensure that we're working in a collaborative and transversal manner. We're already in April of 2023. COP28 is just around the corner. At COP27 last year, we saw some small but very significant steps in terms of bringing the ocean into the global climate debate. We need to collectively, as a community, continue to push that. There will be the Ocean Climate Dialogues in Bonn in mid-June this year. They're currently going through a process of identifying which topics will be addressed during the Ocean Climate Dialogues and brought to COP28. But convenings such as the Ocean Vision Summit and this session that you're having today are so important in helping to advance that global debate and giving a platform and a forum for different stakeholders to come together and discuss issues around not only the ocean climate nexus and the research, but very strongly around the solutions. So again, I wish you a wonderful session. I'm really looking forward to hearing the outcomes of it. Again, I wish I could be there, but thank you all for participating, for engaging, and for being part of the decade. And a very big thank you to Ocean Visions and partners, of course, for organising this session, but also for their work with the Decade Collaborative Centre. So I wish you all great discussions and look forward to hearing the outcomes. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we will hear from Stephen Bograd from SmartNet in NOAA. I'm just going to trade you seats.
Yeah, trade seats. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. So today I'm representing the SmartNet program, which is Sustainability of Marine Ecosystems through Global Knowledge Networks. This has been endorsed by the UN Ocean Decade, and it's sponsored by ICES and Pisces. And just to, let's see, where's the down? There we go. For those less familiar, ICES and Pisces are two large-scale intergovernmental marine organizations. ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea. Pisces, it's not really an acronym, it's the Pacific ICES, North Pacific Marine Science Organization. And in both cases, really the aim here is to facilitate scientific knowledge creation and collaboration and sharing. And ICES has a focus in the North Atlantic domain and Pisces in the North Pacific. And so in terms of what SmartNet is trying to do in terms of its cross-cutting themes. There's a number of them. Whoops, sorry. Involvement of small island developing states, improved science communication, promotion of early career ocean professionals is a real focus for us, indigenous knowledge, empowerment of women, and greener ocean science. So the overall ambition really, and the motivation for why we put SmartNet together within the Ocean Decade is to build on and leverage the infrastructure, the organizational capacity, the networks, and the scientific expertise that these intergovernmental organizations, ICES and Pisces, have. So the aim is to build on these joint activities, facilitate research and knowledge generation for our members and beyond, to share research, develop ideas, and contribute to sustainable ecosystems in a changing climate. And beyond is the key part here. So this is meant to be not our business as usual. Within the Ocean Decade framework, we mean to expand and broaden the reach and the scope of the science that we're doing in ICES and Pisces. So in terms of the primary scientific themes, it's the ones that ICES and Pisces are generally have done a lot of work on and collaborated on: climate variability and change, and in particular, climate impacts on marine ecosystems and fisheries and ecosystem-based management, social, ecological, environmental systems, and impacts on coastal communities and human dimensions. So those are the key themes, and the way we produce our knowledge, there are many ways through our annual meetings and symposia and workshops, but the main process is through these expert groups, working groups, and I list several here that are we currently have as joint ICES-Pisces expert groups. And within the decade, what we're trying to do is expand those working groups beyond the scope of just our typical ICES and Pisces convention areas to bring in more geographic representation and more disciplinary representation as well. So, I mentioned the cross-cutting themes. International capacity building and enhancement is a key one. Early career scientist development, gender awareness, diversity, equity, inclusion, and engagement with indigenous communities. And so there's various ways that we're doing this. Within Pisces, we've just newly created these new advisory panels on engagement of early career ocean professionals and also on developing methods of science communication, effective science communication. And so those advisory panels are really helping a lot with SmartNet and doing our outreach. We're building partners, some that had already existed between Pisces and ICES, and others that are new. Just list a couple examples here: the Asia Pacific Network, the Ocean Knowledge Action Network, and of course we're trying to co-design and communicate with many other Ocean Decade programs around this climate ecosystem nexus. So I'll go through this quickly. Our structural landscape, we have the knowledge production, which is the core of the ICES-Pisces science that we're bringing in new partners. There's the knowledge sharing, again, using the frameworks that have been established within ICES and Pisces. Then the networking, again, really trying to build and co-design activities with other Ocean Decade programs and partner organizations. And then the engagement, trying to go beyond the scope of the communities that we usually communicate with, for example, local and traditional communities. And then, the ultimate aim, of course, is how can we use this structure to help decision-making and promote ocean solutions. So I'll just give you a couple of really quick examples of some of the initial networking activities that we've been doing. One thing is preparing a global survey on public perceptions of the Ocean Decade, and this is led by Mikino-san at the University of Tokyo and others. So the Ocean Decade is about the science we need for the ocean we want. Well, what is the ocean we want, and who is we? And you'll get different answers depending on which communities that you talk to. And the aim here is to start gathering some of that content and that information. And so we've got some pilot surveys going on in Japan, France, and US. Again, Northern Hemisphere focus, but the aim is to globalize that. And to have surveys now, but also late in the decade to get an assessment of what kind of impacts the decade may have had in these communities. And the other thing, we have an ECOP, Kush Jugru at UBC and the Hakai Institute, who's also working within SmartNet, who is leading some of our efforts to do outreach and communication with small island developing states. And she's from Mauritius, so we're starting there. And what we've done in the initial communications is to identify the challenges. And so many of these small island developing states are especially vulnerable to environmental and socioeconomic stressors, but there's very specific needs. They definitely need inclusion and recognition if we are going to work with them, a positive policy environment, technical capacity development, which could include training and financial support. So we're starting to gather some of the information and background we need to make progress there. So finally, where are we going? These are the questions that we're trying to ask ourselves and get input from partners. How do we build these meaningful connections across different spatial and temporal scales, different themes, different disciplines, and support capacity sharing and development? And how can we improve equity and opportunities in a very asymmetric seascape across countries? And so, we're still grappling with those questions. That's what SmartNet is meant to answer. But at least initially, what we're starting off with was providing some training through partnerships, providing that sustained infrastructure and organizational structure that Pisces and ICES has, and exchange lessons learned and best practices on several key themes. And I'll just end with an advertisement. For those of you who are going to be at the ECWO meeting in a couple of weeks in Bergen, Norway, we do have a workshop on the climate fisheries nexus within the UN Ocean Decade, where we're going to be talking about co-designing some of these activities. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we will hear from Neil, who's representing Blue Climate Initiative, as well as the Geosteering Committee.
Yes. Trip over you. Thank you. I thought I'd just start off with where I came from, literally, where I flew from. So I flew here from French Polynesia, which is an overseas country of France in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, for those unfamiliar. And I mean the heart of the Pacific Ocean. If you play with Google Earth, center it on Tahiti, I think that's the view where you see the most ocean, and you really understand this is a blue planet. You almost see no land. A little bit of California, a little bit of Antarctica, obviously New Zealand and Hawaii, some large islands. But so this is where I lived for over 20 years now. And I just highlight here Tahiti and a couple of the islands, the neighboring islands, Mo'orea and Tetiaroa, a small atoll to the north. So I'm the director for the University of California, I work for the University of California, Berkeley, and I run the Gump South Pacific Research Station on Mo'orea, which is also for the US National Science Foundation, the only long-term ecological research site focused on coral reefs, or on a coral reef, the coral reef of Mo'orea, since 2004, so a long history. And the French National Lab, CRIOB, also located on Mo'orea, coordinates the Francis Center of Excellence for Coral Reefs. So there's a lot of scientific and technological capacity here on this island and in French Polynesia in general to understand this aspect of marine ecology and ecosystems. We also have a research station now on Tetiaroa, a private atoll, in association with the Brando, a resort, a LEED Platinum resort. One of the innovative things the Brando's done is to use seawater air conditioning, so the resort is cool with water coming up from 900 meters deep. So that's one example of an ocean-based solution for climate change that we like to highlight and hopefully can scale to other places. But we have a direct experience of this now, and so those are the two stations, research stations. I'm a scientist that I'm associated with. But today I'm here representing the Blue Climate Initiative, which started in 2019, and the fiscal sponsor of this initiative is Tetiaroa Society, and it's a UN Decade program. And we take a very holistic vision to try to promote ocean-based solutions for climate change, for people, ocean, and planet. And it's not a scientific program, it's an action-oriented program, so to actually implement these solutions and help accelerate actual on-the-ground or in-the-water programs. And so there's a number of programs that I'll reference, but you can see more on the Blue Climate Initiative's website. So we started, as I say, in 2019, auspicious time to start anything, of course. 2020 rolled in, and we initially planned to sponsor some sectoral reflections, mainly from academia, sort of specialist knowledge on what might be the transformative or transformational opportunities that exist, that are out there. So we conducted largely online in 2020, 2021, this expert review in 6 sectors and published this book, which describes some of these opportunities. We then wanted to sort of source, well, what are people, that's the expert view, what are people actually doing? And so we launched community prizes, so a prize for communities that are innovating in this space, and awarded 6 projects, which again, you can find out more on the website. And then also sponsored a prize, more technology-oriented, what are the innovative technological solutions, and that was a $1 million prize. And again, some of the programs we've heard about here were featured in that. And that led up to a summit in May last year, which sort of brought some of that sort of horizon scanning and knowledge together, and some of the groups that we'd met along the way to see, okay, now what could we do going forward to accelerate some of these solutions? So I'll just finish really with the outcome of that summit, and what we're continuing here, looking for partnerships and how we can make an impact, maximize the resources that we have. Our current sort of focus areas are around ocean protection. You can see the poster that's here, particularly on really pushing the very urgent need for action against deep sea mining, to try and put a ban on deep sea mining, or a moratorium at least, and read more about that on the poster. That's tightly linked to rights of the ocean and the strong voice of indigenous communities about really changing our relationship with the ocean, at least changing some of the industrialized relationship we have with the ocean. And so the ocean is potentially having rights that's strongly tied, as I say, to indigenous voices, and partnering with, in the Pacific and Polynesia where we are, the Hokulea, for example, is Pan-Pacific voyage that can be educating, learning, and promoting programs to preserve and enhance sustainable use of the ocean. And then another kind of set of programs very strongly represented here, we'll be hearing about the last couple of days, around promoting what we call blue pathways to net zero at island scale, at national scale, but particularly in the Pacific Islands in our case, marine energy and food production, marine CDR, and also sustainable tourism. So as a sector, tourism is an incredibly powerful global industry, and partly because we have strong relationships with that industry, and places like French Polynesia and many other SIDS and other coastal areas are quite dependent, or totally dependent in some cases, on tourism. How can tourism be a force for good in the future? So I can talk more about those later, but thanks so much.
Okay, next we'll hear from Donna.
Hello, everybody. So I usually speak about investing in blue tech startups, but today I'm here representing an effort to develop a shared framework for measuring impact from startups, ocean-related startups specifically. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but I wanted to give you some quick context, so I'm going to fly through a few contextual slides here. First, let me say my frame of reference comes from my work at Sea Ahead, which is a blue tech innovation hub based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we work to catalyze venture formation built around IP or tech from adjacent sectors or new business models. We work with startups to help them grow to have impact at scale. We run an incubator in partnership with New England Aquarium. We run an accelerator in the Gulf of Mexico, and we have a venture studio model. And then importantly, we invest in companies coming out of that infrastructure, but also from other sources as well. I'm sure everyone is aware that the pipeline of ocean-driven startups is growing rapidly, and it's globally distributed. So figuring out a way to assess impact is critically important for this growing set of efforts. In addition, the incubators, accelerators, and other resources available to startups is growing rapidly too. And not surprisingly, capital is flowing into the area as a result. The question becomes, how do we make the most of this? And that's where impact is such an important consideration. Out of this trend came an effort called 1,000 Ocean Startups. And this effort was formed because despite all that progress in providing resources, there are still huge gaps. And in light of the urgency of addressing ocean challenges, it was clear that we needed to do something to develop more of an ecosystem for providing resources more effectively and on larger scale. The 1,000 Ocean Startups initiative aims to support at least 1,000 startups over 10 years. And actually, I feel, did I skip one here? No, and is guided largely by SDG 14 goals. So far, about 300 startups have been supported, and these startups fall into categories such as sustainable ocean food production, solutions to ocean pollution, ocean data, low carbon transportation, ports and infrastructure, clean ocean energy, and then a third of the startups fall into other categories, including CDR. The 1,000 Ocean Startups initiative is spread across 6 active work streams, boosting entrepreneurship support organizations like the ones you saw listed on previous slides, fostering collaboration across the member startups, sharing deal flow, building a shared network of mentors. The one we're going to be focusing on today, streamlining impact measurement and reporting, and then finally inspiring a broader ocean impact innovation ecosystem. Now, I think everyone in this room, everyone at this conference appreciates that measuring impact across the range, the huge variety of startups in the ocean-related ecosystem is challenging because there are so many different types of companies and their potential impacts are so varied. But I'm just going to raise 2 companies that I think exemplify that challenge. One is a company called CERT, short for Can I Recycle This?, which has amassed an incredible amount of data on what materials are actually recycled and where. And they provide that information to corporate clients and affect their sourcing so that they look for materials that truly can be recycled, and then make sure that their enterprises get materials to places where they truly will be recycled. So the impacts we're looking for from CERT are improved supply chain transparency, more avoidance of plastic packaging, and increased recycling rates. In contrast, Beta Hatch, also serving the blue economy, is a mealworm farming company. And so the impacts we're looking for from them are avoidance of the use of wild fish stocks in feed, whether that's poultry or aquaculture, upcycling of agricultural byproducts and waste, and replacement of chemical fertilizers. So clearly all important impacts, but incredibly different. I'm going to move through this really fast. When we started this initiative, we surveyed organizations in the ocean impact innovation space. And what we learned is that across the board, people felt that coming up with a shared framework for measuring impact was critically important or critical, the top 2 categories. And that most were very early in the process of developing their own approaches. And as a result of that, in part, we're very happy to align with a framework if one could be developed. And so as this process moved forward, we clarified the primary objectives, which I would just summarize as 3. One is, over time, we want to be able to identify interventions that have true important impact. We want to be able to aggregate and communicate on progress toward a sustainable ocean economy. And finally, we need to simplify impact measurement for startups who generally are already resource constrained, but need to be focused on their impact at the end of the day. To develop a framework that is credible and has a true impact, we knew that we needed it to be grounded in science, flexible and adaptable, moving far beyond no harm, that isn't enough, and focused on priority KPIs and supported by resources for implementation. After much discussion, as you can imagine, we settled on 6 key impact areas: a sustainably managed ocean resources, a clean ocean, thriving and restored marine habitats, support for a 1.5 degrees centigrade world. That may become 2, but we're still using 1.1 as our target. Resilient coastal communities, and importantly, positive socioeconomic outcomes with an orientation toward well-being and equity. And I should have pointed out right from the start that while environmental impacts are where we started, social impacts are a very important part of this initiative. You probably can't read all of these, but we came up with 30 KPIs spread across those impact areas. And these are the KPIs we're pushing startups to focus on, to identify as relevant impacts for them. So just to give you an example in case it isn't readable from where you're sitting, for example, for sustainably managed ocean resources, we're looking at metrics like volume of biomass preserved or restored, volume of seafood waste reduced, welfare of marine life, and tons of ocean-based seaweed and bivalves produced. We wanted this framework to be flexible in a number of ways. I'm just going to highlight a few. One is that companies are encouraged and enabled to measure their impact across multiple impact areas. They don't have to choose one. And the framework can be applied in either a qualitative or quantitative mode. And also importantly, we want this framework to work in concert with other measurement frameworks out there that may be specific to a region or a sector, or may just be best business practice oriented metrics. So the idea is that this will work smoothly with other approaches as well. It's not meant to stand alone. And so just to bring this to a close, look forward to discussing it more during Q&A, but the working group, and you see the working group members here who have focused on the Ocean Impact Navigator, were also supported by a company called Systemic in pulling together a report that was published last June. And since that time, we have been welcoming input and other ideas, which are currently being folded into the draft framework that I spoke to before, with a goal of developing and really operationalizing an online open source tool, which we hope to complete by year end. That may be aggressive, but that is our goal as of now. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, we will hear from Alex.
Hello everyone, it's a really honor to stay here to talk about the GEOS Patagonia Hub. And I would like to talk today what we are working on in my country, Chile, and related to how we can move ahead in these healthy oceans. And the first question is why GEOS Patagonia Hub? Is why there? This is the question. This is because the framework. First, Chile is leading the ocean champion. There is an opportunity to drive large-scale solutions there. Indeed, Chile is an oceanic country with around 4,000 linear kilometers of coastline, 12 in efficient power in the world, the second agriculture producer, and 95% of North foreign trade is carried out by the sea. So we have talking about infrastructure, ports, docks, and so on. And indeed, we are the door for the APEC regions. And the second is the framework is our commitment with the foreign affairs. Chile launched the platform for science-based ocean solutions in COP25. And indeed, this platform is trying to follow the climate change and the ocean nexus. And three is international foreign affairs in Chile. Chile joins to the Global Ocean Alliance. And further, it's promote the creation of the ocean protection network to cover to Canada and to Chile. And this is independent of if we are changing the administration. We have the same policy in the oceans and environmental policy. So this is an stability about the environmental policy. Indeed, Chile is leading the Santiago network for the loss and damage and climate resilience after Sharm el-Sheikh and COP25. And we are working on mitigation and loss and damage, minimizing and so on. The idea is catalyze technical assistance of the relevant organizations, body network there. So what we are working right now, we are articulating the scientific and innovation capacity of the Patagonia for development of solutions based on the oceans for the climate crisis and sustainable development. And we have 4 pillars. We are trying to combine all together people working there to try to leverage resources and enabling conditions to try to get more and more innovations, startups, and so on, trying to encourage for the young people, maybe in the middle age and middle age and so on, trying to provide more and more solutions because we have a natural laboratory to deploy different kind of technology. So we are working with the government right now. We are in conversation with Corfo. Corfo is like specific like a national developing bank. It's like trying to put in money to leverage on resources and creating different multiple partnership. And we are working with the private sector because we have a salmoniculture there. We have the mining sector is very interested because the port is located to exporting the concentrate of copper. And we are working with NGO like and others like MERI and Nature Conservancy and so on. And we have the Chilean Navy. Why? Because, for example, this is one kind of examples of this framework of enabling conditions to encourage for the innovations. The Navy, for example, has built the first Chilean research ship. And all made in Chile, we have is one of the first most advanced research ships right now in the world. And right now we are a lot of fundings to work in the Antarctic Research Institute supported for Chilean Navy too in Antarctica. So it's a very natural and lab. We have very good innovation systems. We have the Corfo, the National Developing Banks. We have the Startup Chile, it's an initiative to try to connect in the entrepreneurs coming to Chile or the Chile from the world. And we have companies like working with angels investors, with like Endeavor, you know. And we have a specific, indeed, and California Research Council working there, or Chile Mas is working in Boston, Massachusetts. And right now, for example, this is one case that new advances. Chile leads the technological development program to boost sustainable offshore aquaculture. Indeed, right now we are investing a lot in trying to develop integrated multi-traffic aquaculture system because the salmoniculture is a key industry there and working the south of Chile into the Patagonia and we are talking about indeed about the rehabilitation, restoration of the places and so on. And another good case is we are looking for another alternative for the blue economy because, for example, if we are talking about the seaweed crops, the idea is what happened after that, after the harvest. No, right now we are working with the Minister of Science and Minister of the Environment to try to looking for bioproducts, like for example fertilizers, to try to replace the fertilizers from the fuel oils, or the seaweed to use into the ensilage for the coast to try to reduce the methane emissions. And so this is an open field for the entrepreneurs because finally the idea of the Chilean government is trying to leverage resources between private and the funding from the government. We are working with different networks. Right now we are talking with the Fundación MERI. Fundación MERI is, you know, all people know that working on the oceans. And we are talking with the Chapter 0 Chile chapter. Chapter 0 is the global initiative and trying to encourage the companies and the boards to try to achieve the zero goals for 2050. And we are talking with the Race to Resilience. It's an initiative of the champions and in COP trying to mobilize the private sector to invest in this kind of the technologies to try to carbon dioxide removal, to try to carbon capture and so on. And indeed, for us, it's very important, the social and environmental system, because we need to work with the local communities in the borderline. I don't know if you know, but in Chile, the borderline is people living in poverty. So we need to try to find new kind of activities to try to provide jobs and employment and so on. And finally, the most important things the GEOS Patagonia have is the governance. Right now, we have a very good governance, for example, to try to manage different kind of areas into the oceans. One very good example is the benthonic resource management areas. In 1997, the MERVs have been the mission administration characterized by the government users, co-management of benthic fisheries, resources, and so on. The idea is trying to local communities working with the private sector and the funding from the governments and entrepreneurs can manage a specific area to try to promote the restoration, rehabilitation, and maybe increase the biodiversity and so on. So this is because we are planning the first conference in November, and the idea is try to combine all people working together in science, Ministry of Government, fundings, entrepreneurs, and connecting people, connecting NGOs, connecting companies that right now they are looking for any solution to try to increase the environmental quality where they have the productions. So the Patagonia Hub has significant scientific and innovative capabilities for developing ocean basin solutions that address the climate crisis and promote the sustainable development. I hope to see you there. Welcome to Chile, and I would like to keep in touch with this new hub. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I do encourage all of you to find our presenters at lunch or even sometime this afternoon or tomorrow. Before I open it up to audience participation, I do have one quick question I'd like to pose to the panel, and that is, how are you leveraging the UN Ocean Decade Framework to advance your work?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. That's a great question. Well, we're using the processes that the decade has prepared, like the communities of practice, and we held a SmartNet satellite event around the Productive Ocean Laboratory, for example. But a lot of it really is just kind of bottom up. We're trying to co-design activities with other Ocean Decade groups around the climate ecosystem nexus. I think, the establishment of the Decade Collaborative Centers is really a game changer. So, SmartNet is under the Ocean Visions Decade Collaborative Center. I know that there's a couple of other DCCs at this meeting, the Coastal Resilience and Northeast Pacific. I think these are really going to be able to help facilitate coordination and communication and co-design amongst the other Ocean Decade programs. So I think, I'm hoping we can take advantage of that in the near future.
I can go next quickly. We really look at that as our foundation, and it has provided the impetus for people to gather to solve some of these challenges and really look at approaches that can help us to standardize and move forward faster while still being wise. And we use the effort as a guidepost as well. It's really set the vision for what our efforts are trying to accomplish, and we look at our role as operationalizing that vision, as making it real and providing more structure and a pathway for implementation.
Yeah, I think for us, initially having the endorsement of the UN Decade was significant, just to help us get off the ground as a new initiative. And then since then, much has just been said, the collaboration with other Decade programs, that's why we're here partly, is to explore how can we better coordinate. And for example, through GEOS and being on the GEOS steering committee, I think that's how I heard about the Navigator, the Impact Navigator, which I think is a great tool, and really been interested in how we help operationalize that.
Just maybe, I don't know what I need to say because you are saying so maybe right now, this kind of initiative, I would like to use my hat from the IPCC. I am a member of the IPCC working into the Working Group 3 on mitigation. I think the new approaches and the blue economy is a very good pathway to try to work in the same pathway between mitigation and adaptation, because you have too many approaches to try to, that maybe suppose that you have a seagrass crops, we can make a carbon capture, but we are more resilient coastal line too. So always we are talking about the mitigation for one side and adaptation for another side. But this kind of initiative is very good because we have too many approaches one can join and work together, the mitigation and adaptation at the same time. So this is more smart than a strategy because finally you're putting money and trying to resolve both sides of the same coin. This is because it's very important to make a multiple partnership between government, because finally it's a local solutions from different governments, from America, Asia, and so on. And on another side, we have the private sector. The private sector is looking for any solutions, and sometimes you don't have the solutions in the market. You need to try to improve and drive the flow and address the flow of the money for the new and innovative startups and so on, trying to find new kind of solutions that right now on the table we don't have them. So in my opinion, this kind of meetings and this kind of approaches, when we have different and multiple stakeholders, investors, boards, and entrepreneurs, and faculties, or NGOs, maybe it's the right place to try to address and drive the flow of money to the right approaches and creating the local impacts and deploying into the territory. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll open it up for questions from the audience, if there are any.
Thank you. This is a comment that would want a sort of a reflection for the See Ahead presentation. And one of the ideas for the 1000 Ocean Startup is that as you have this ecosystem of incubators, venture capitalists, and so forth, the UN Decade could provide this idea of guiding these startups towards putting together a portfolio of solutions that really address some of the big challenges. Because right now, the startup world is exploding in the ocean, and it's almost unguided. And there is maybe an idea that eventually they will coalesce to some system-level solution. But perhaps the UN Decade and some of these programs, like the GEOS program, for example, could provide sort of a think tank to say, orient, these are perhaps the critical problems you want to focus and call for action in the startup world, and this is how they can interact together to really achieve some scale. And I was wondering what you think about that.
I think it makes so much sense. I do feel like they're nascent efforts to do that, and that part of the beauty of the impact areas is that it allows us to look who the players are by impact area. We also look at who the players are by technology, but that's a little bit different thing. And one of the goals really is bringing the startups themselves together so they can learn from each other, but also so we can introduce resources to help take them forward as a group wisely. But I think there's a lot more room for that. So I really like what you're suggesting. We should talk afterward about how we might make that happen.
This might be accidentally a follow-up to, was that Emanuele's question there? Wondering how you pull in best scientific guidance. There's so much kind of buzz in startup land, and sometimes the investments go to the splashy, exciting things, but with scientists maybe saying we're not so sure that's going to work or it's going to have the impact. So how do you pull that kind of best scientific guidance in?
Yeah, so I can speak for how we do it, and I would say virtually all of the entities that we're co-investing with are doing the same thing. We have worked really hard to develop an ecosystem that includes the research community. We have direct partnerships with research institutions and governmental agencies who are moving the science forward in these areas, and I think that is so important. So when we look at an opportunity, we're not just looking at the possible financial returns, but we're really trying to understand the possible positive impacts and the possible collateral damage. And there have been many investment opportunities we've turned down solely for the reason that we thought they could cause harm. And again, I think many other investing entities and incubators and accelerators have close relationships with science institutions conducting science, or with deep expertise that we absolutely have to tap into. There's more room for that for sure. For the Navigator specifically, I think with some of the KPIs that have been established, There are modes of measurement available today that are fairly well accepted, peer-reviewed. We feel confident. There are other areas where we don't have good methods, and we certainly don't have standardized methods, and they certainly aren't peer-reviewed, and we're going to need to work very closely together so that that can evolve in a responsible and efficient way. And if you have other thoughts, I'd love to hear those too. Yeah.
I could just add to that and respond. I think the systems scale is really important here as well. Like how do these interact with each other? And so one approach, and I think the hubs sort of may play to this, is in a place-based approach, where you connect communities, the innovations, the startups, these great ideas, and science, where we understand how some of these places function. We've got time series information about some of them, and so we can see how do these all work together in a holistic or a systemic approach. And for that, I think having a concept of place and working in some places that can be pioneers in different types of system and that can share and inform with other places and building that sort of community to community and scaling horizontally, not always just trying to scale vertically.
Just I would like to add about the role of the hubs. Because in the first presentation you talk about the network of networks. Finally, the hub, despite of the hub has a local action. Finally, we can connect different hubs throughout the world with different entrepreneurs and researchers and connecting the global south, for example, and the most important research center in the global north. For example, sometimes, and right now I am located in Cambridge, working in Harvard, and sometimes you have too many entrepreneurs looking for any opportunity to try to deploy their innovations in different countries, and they don't know that maybe the right solution is maybe in the south of Africa, or in the South America, and so on. So if we are creating different hubs, we are creating network of networks, connecting people and multi-sectors and multiple partnerships and so on, maybe leveraging resources to try to make and invest in the right and innovations in the right place. This is the idea of the network of networks.
Yeah, I would. Sorry.
Go ahead, Steve.
Just to follow up on that, yeah, I like Manu's idea of a think tank and really thinking about how do you prioritize which problems we're going to tackle, especially within the Ocean Decade. We've only got 7 more years, although we're going to keep going after that, of course. And that's got to be a balance between, what are the most urgent, immediate problems versus, what is the lowest hanging fruit? What do we have the capacity and scientific knowledge to tackle? But I think what the Ocean Decade provides, as you were saying, is, this network so that we can actually learn from one another and begin to prioritize what those problems are.
So quick question actually for Courtney and Rebecca and any of you. Going back to Allison's introduction, we're going to be at the decade midpoint in less than 2 years. What are you doing, what are you thinking about in preparation for that, and how can we all help?
Yeah, I can start. Maybe Rebecca, you want to contribute? So Stephen sort of alluded to this earlier, but the endorsement of actual collaborative centers is fairly new. And so I think some of us are in the beginning stages of figuring out how we want to best coordinate these efforts. But the idea is that, especially coming up with the UN meeting April 2024, we want to make sure that we're participating not only in the specific Decade Challenge working group. So this particular center focuses on Decade Challenge 5, which is climate. But we also want to make sure that as different calls for actions come up, there was one in April, the Blue Food Program was just endorsed. Our particular center want to make sure that we are aligning different programs with us so that we can increase the efforts as much as possible, but also being thoughtful to make sure that we're reserving space for calls in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Anna, for the question. My name is Rebecca Martone. I'll stand up. I'm the director for the Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific. We're a regional collaborative center, so tackle all of the themes under the Ocean Decade, and our region stretches from Alaska down through Baja California and out to Hawaii. Small scope. One of the things we were really thinking about is how do we center on our local communities and the issues, particularly for Indigenous communities and underserved and underrepresented communities in our region. And I think many of you spoke to the need to address this from sort of a natural science perspective, but you also touched on social justice and the idea of co-designing and co-developing solutions with stakeholders. And I think we have to think about how do we uplift those voices in helping us identify priorities, and that's something we're really focused on. How do we assess those social justice issues as we start to tackle some of these problems? So it's something we are very interested in talking with all of you about and are open to lots of help. So come find me if you're interested in working with the Collaborative Center in the Northeast Pacific and my colleague Naomi. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you all for joining. And I do want to just add a very quick call for action for this particular Decade Collaborative Center. So part of our initiative is presenting different convenings like the one we did today, but we also have two other initiatives that we could really use your help with. The first is our Innovation Exchange, and so we're going to have an Innovation Showcase, I believe tomorrow, Nikhil, is that right? Today, okay. So later today, we're gonna have an Innovation Showcase in the lower lobby area, but part of the Innovation Exchange that we're starting with the Decade Collaborative Center is really showcasing those innovations and solutions, not just to the Decade community, but to the larger CDR, Climate Ocean Nexus community. So we want your help with that, identifying really cool innovations and solutions that we can showcase. And then the second is what we're referring to generally as our Ocean Climate Nexus community, which really touches on capacity building, so continuing education efforts, internships, fellowships, and also knowledge exchange, co-design. So we'd really love your help with that. If you're interested in that topic, please find me. Thank you so much to our speakers, and I think it's time for lunch.